Welcome to The Bridge, from surviving to thriving in medical school, a medical student podcast on success and belonging at UCSF. This series explores how medical students succeed and thrive in medical school through important relationships, academic support, well-being, and career exploration. I'm your host, Alvin Gwonga, a second year, or should I say third year now, medical student at UCSF. Thank you for joining us. Meaningful relationships are central to success in medical school. Today's episode examines the principles of relationship-centered communication and how students can build effective relationships with peers, staff, and faculty. I would like to introduce two special guests in this episode. One is Micro-cheerleaders, a third-year medical student at UCSF School of Medicine. I would also like to introduce Dr. Odi Ehi, an associate professor of anesthesiology and our director of student support in the UCSF School of Medicine. Michael and Odi, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
First question is for you, Odi. What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you?
One of the things that I did and still have a huge passion for is salsa dancing. I just have a big passion for Afro-Cuban salsa dancing specifically. I have gone to Cuba about 8 times now, and in a space where I love it so much so that I learned how to lead. So I've been dancing probably for well over 20 years now. And if I wasn't a physician, I'd probably be a salsa dance instructor.
That's amazing. If I'd known that sooner, I would have asked you to lead a little SNMA salsa dancing class.
It's not too late. We can figure something out.
Don't think I'm playing. I'll reach out to the new board to ask them to do this.
Oh my God. Don't worry. I will show up. I will show up.
That's awesome. That's actually really awesome to know. In terms of your career in medicine, what do you find is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
Recently, I just had a couple of my students that were part of my first cohort as a Bridges coach. I was a Bridges coach in 2017, and those students started brand new when I was also a budding faculty member at UCSF. And 8 years later, I had them over at my home, and they are budding attendings. And it has been this long journey of 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency. And we're just having conversations about expectations when they're out. And I feel like a proud sister or a proud auntie. I really do. I saw them from the beginning, and I'm seeing them so confident, so passionate about what they're about to accomplish as they move forward to their next phases in their journey. And it makes me so excited. I feel like a proud sister. It's just great. Very excited about that for them.
I love to hear that. I feel like I'm so early into my journey right now that I cannot imagine what it would be like to be past residency and thinking about actually living in my career. So I'm glad to hear that you still have such a strong relationship with them, because I love my Bridges coach, and it's one part of the curriculum that I really appreciate here.
One thing I will say is that it flies by. It really does. So while you're just thinking, oh my gosh, I can't even think about that yet, live in the moment and really enjoy the relationships that you have right now, because med school flies by, residency flies by, and before you know it, you're going to be out. So take in the moments.
And make sure to attend some salsa dancing classes in the way. And then what about you, Michael? What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you?
Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I think I'm just a very introspective and reflective person. And I think maybe when someone meets me or talks to me, they don't initially realize that. But I love to journal, and I love to think a lot and reflect on the experiences that I had throughout the day or in the last few weeks, and how that's impacting my mindset for better or for worse, or just neutrally. it's not always just reflecting about the really big things like, oh my gosh, I had a huge event today in the hospital or at school, but sometimes even just really small things like, oh, I had like a 20-second conversation with a classmate. How did that make me feel? What did that teach me about life or the world? And that's something that I do all the time. And yeah, I think that's something that people don't realize about me until they actually get to know me.
My follow-up question for you is, what is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
One of my favorite roles is I'm a tutor as part of, we call it PTP here, but it's called the Peer Tutoring Program. And essentially that's a program where you start as a first year actually teaching your own classmates, but then you continue on as a second year, third year, fourth year, and you create really fun lessons and review sessions and review sheets for first year medical students. And it's really aimed at helping the first year medical students transition to medical school because the transition is very difficult. And the point of these lessons is it's not meant to replace the lectures that our professors with a lot more experience are giving, but it's meant to just be a fun way to like review some material, review some science, and like build community. I love it. One of my favorite things to do in lessons is always have music playing, like when people are coming in and coming out. I always bring candy and like give candy to people when they try to answer a question. And the community is really strong too. One of my favorite parts about it is that it builds relationships between the first years. And you can really see that as a teacher. I remember when I was a first year as a student, some of my best friends came from just, we would always go to PTP at the same time. And then we would turn that into a tradition, like go get dinner before, go get dinner or boba after. And then seeing that as when I was a second year and third year teaching the students, and I see them also becoming friends with each other and during a really chaotic time, I think it warms my heart because I know that that's how I make community here. And then seeing them make community and passing that forward makes it a very fulfilling role.
In PTP, or just generally the roles that you've had within the School of Medicine, can you talk about how students can respectfully and effectively ask for feedback from faculty and work with faculty?
Working with faculty and working with staff, asking for feedback, especially if it's in a role that maybe you're not as comfortable with yet, can be very intimidating. And I get that. And I feel that way also. What helps me to make me feel more comfortable with reaching out to faculty and discussing how can I get better is just zooming out, focusing on the big picture of what is our goal? Because most of the time, if you're working with the faculty, you have a common goal. So whether that be in PTP context, educating the class below us, creating community, or anything else that you're doing, whether that be research or clinical work or a new project, you both have a common shared goal, and your goal is to get there and to do it as effectively as you can. And I try to focus on that and say, hey, we both really want to achieve this goal. How am I doing? What can I do to get us there better? Or what have I done that works? And how can we build off of that? And I try to focus on that and less on taking things personally and less about like, how am I doing? But more so, we have this goal. How can we get there? We both share this and let's work together on that. And if you select your right mentor or the right person to work with, in theory, you should have that same mind, same wavelength, and you'll be able to work on that together.
Have you seen instances where that hasn't gone well?
Not necessarily negatively to the point that it's a negative relationship where I'm feeling actively hurt. Nothing like that. But I have definitely seen it where it's just neutral. We're like, okay, we just don't resonate. Maybe I'll meet with someone for a project or we're working and the project just kind of falls through because we're just not on the same page. We don't have that same goal. We don't share the same motivation for what we're doing. I think there's always a level of mutual respect that I've experienced here at UCSF. We always have mutual respect no matter what. But sometimes you just don't have that same unifying factor, and sometimes projects fall through the cracks. And again, that's okay. You can think about mentor selection or project selection or whatever as much as you want. Sometimes you won't be aligned with everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's just a natural process of the world and life.
And back to you, Odi. How do you think medical schools can cultivate an inclusive culture where students feel comfortable engaging with faculty and staff, particularly when they're seeking guidance and support.
You mentioned a really, really good point about how it really falls on the institution. While individuals can have significant impact in the way that they can cultivate some of these spaces of inclusivity, the institutional component can obviously play a much more profound impact in that. And so when I'm thinking of how institutions can really facilitate that, that really goes down to the basics of faculty development, open communication, training around, well, if you don't know what to do when, let's say, a microaggression is encountered, whether a student is facing that from a patient or a student is facing it from a peer student or even from faculty or other staff members, how you would navigate that rather than foster a space of silence and empowerment of that microaggression. And so when I think about how institutions can promote that, that's also through the open communication piece. Med schools can encourage a culture of open dialogue. They can make sure that they're not punitive to individuals who come forward with their concerns and things that have happened to them that may have caused negative impact. They can create a space of bravery is what I would say. I now shy away from saying safe spaces, but I think a space of bravery so that we can actually have those difficult conversations. But it's those difficult conversations that allow us to grow. That can be really powerful in the ways that institutional is lending itself to intentionality around fostering that space of inclusivity and belonging. Also, structured office hours where faculty members are available so that students can come to them and help facilitate conversations around difficulties that they're having, whether that's virtual, in person. I find that oftentimes students seem to prefer virtual depending on where they're coming from and not necessarily having to do the traveling from whatever site they're coming from with regard to their school and other activities that they're involved in. So meeting people where they're at. And then I think storytelling is really important. There's such a power in storytelling when we think about ways to foster these spaces of inclusivity. So when we're thinking about training, when I'm thinking about training, I'm not really saying, oh, everyone should have a module that they might put on silent. And once they are through that module and the check is done, then they're done with the so-called training process. But I'm really speaking about really connecting with individuals with regards to storytelling, impact, really centering humanity and showcasing that level of relationship with each other. And seeing people's stories, hearing people's stories, when I visualize what people are saying to me as you're telling me things that sometimes are quite vulnerable, it really does create this ability for me to be more intentional in the other ways that I move around so that I can continue to be more mindful of ways that I could foster a little bit more inclusiveness and belonging in my immediate environment. And I wonder how impactful it could be when we do it from a space where the institution creates some structure around that and fostering that.
I totally agree with that. An individual that is really great at this is Dr. Denise Davis. Sometimes she hosts get-togethers on campus, sometimes at her home. I remember my first year of medical school attending an event that she hosted and seeing all these different amazing physicians and resident trainees, medical students at different phases of their careers, and listening to them talk, yes, about medicine, but other aspects of it, not just, oh, this patient had coronary artery disease, or this is what I did in the OR today, but here are some of the challenges that I face at work, and here's how I balance being a parent and being a physician. This week I had a really hard week because now my parent is sick and I have to balance care for patients and care for my family, and really humanizing y'all to us from the medical student perspective, because it's so intimidating. It is so intimidating when, yes, you are fully an adult, but you're also just at the bottom of the totem pole where you don't know that you can ask more personal questions. And when I look at faculty, I think you guys have it together. Everything's perfect. Everything is great. You know, you see someone's titles and you're like, you're director of this, and you've planned this event and you've planned that event. And I'm like, wow, can I talk to them? Will they even have time? But someone like Dr. Davis that really brings people together in a space where we can, for a little bit, disregard hierarchy a little bit and calls folks that are higher up in their training, further along in their training, to really be open. And I think it allows for those of us that are just starting out to be more vulnerable.
I couldn't agree with you more, Alvin. Dr. Denise Davis is a shero of mine. One of my mentors when I first got started out as a coach. And I could not say what you have said in a more profound, eloquent way. It captures exactly that. There's the intentionality that she brings to the medical school and the way that she creates space in her home and brings people from different backgrounds together and leads with a bit of vulnerability, a little bit of breaking down some of those barriers, and then allowing us to actually have really honest conversations with each other so that we can actually realize that we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. And this idea that you have to be perfect at every cost is really not sustainable. If anything, leading with the mistakes that you've made and what you've learned from that and the ways that you've grown from that, I think can be so much more powerful. And honestly, it's not something that's easy to do. It was harder for me to accept the imperfection as a student, really feeling like she was charged with having to show everybody who she was.
What you said there has me really thinking about when folks that are teaching really are honest about their mistakes and what they've learned from mistakes. It really helps break down this culture of perfection that sometimes we have in medicine, because I feel those same pressures that you felt in medical school. Like, I have to be competent and I have to say the right thing and have the perfect response. And when I'm in my didactic period, I have to just be able to say, this patient is presenting with XYZ in the most eloquent manner because it's a reflection of me and what I know and what I've learned. And I find that now that I'm a year and a half in and I've actually spoken to a couple of my classmates, we all have our moments of doubt. It is a cycle. There are days when you feel like, wow, I know this and I'm great. And there are days when you're like, ooh, this subject is really kicking me right now. It's not sticking and you feel really alone. And the moments when I've really talked to folks about just how they're doing and realizing I am not alone in that, not just among my peers, but also among faculty, with residents, with attendings. We're like, yeah, Alvin, I did not understand that when I went over it the first, second, and third time. And to be honest, I don't know if I still understand it perfectly now. That level of openness, I think, helps remove the sense of shame that comes out with not being perfect. And like you said, bringing back the humanity in medical training, bringing back that humility of you are not going to be perfect. And the earlier, I think, in my career, I can really internalize that, I think the healthier I will be later on. And so I just appreciate truly hearing from folks like you, hearing from folks like Denise, hearing from people who are not afraid to tell us what they've learned from their mistakes and not afraid to be honest about how difficult the journey has been and are truly humble in that.
Yeah, Alvin, it just makes you, I think, a better physician when you are open about what you don't know. And there's one thing to be open about what you don't know, and then you put a lot of effort in really trying to close that gap. When we're speaking about mistakes and the openness of what we don't know, we're not saying, oh, we don't know it, and that's just okay. We're saying, we don't know it. Let's work together to figure out how we can close the gap and make sure that we're better as a result of it.
I feel like in this conversation, we've talked a bit about how it's important to have open communication and how that can lead to building inclusive spaces. And I'm really curious about your thoughts on how relationship-centered communication can help build these inclusive spaces, and what ingredient comes to mind when you think about relationship-centered comm.
So when I'm thinking about relationship-centered communication, I think you have to at least consider some element of vulnerability when you're trying to promote a way to communicate in a way that the individual that you are speaking to has some form of trust in you with the information that you're providing. I think it also begins with active listening. I think that the individual that you are promoting some form of relationship with, there needs to be a way that you're displaying that you are truly paying attention to that individual. You are engaging with them. Your ways of responding to them, they're thoughtful responses. And if you are really engaging in that relationship-centered communication, it's going to show respect. It's going to encourage even further open dialogue. So I think the act of listening is one piece. Once you've garnered some element of vulnerability, I think the other component to think about is empathy. When someone has actually been vulnerable with you to tell you their state of where they are, being able to actually share the feelings of what's coming through and demonstrating that I'm here to support you. And yes, please go on. Please continue to share. And I'm not only listening, but I hear you. And mirroring back that empathy, I think also not different from what I've said earlier, transparency, I think is a big piece, right? Openness, honesty about the way that you are communicating. And if we're thinking about patients, honesty with regard to the level of confidence you are communicating with regard to the information that you know versus what you may not know, and some honesty about that. I'm not really sure about this particular piece. I'm going to do some due diligence. I'm going to look it up, or maybe I could refer you to this individual, or let's have another conversation about it when we know a little bit more, when we're thinking about the way we interact with our patients, but also just with each other when we're thinking about relationship-centered communication. Again, that open honesty, like telling that learner, yeah, about this block, I haven't seen it in a while. Let's go through it. This is the YouTube video I'm looking at. Let's talk through it. This is what I remember about it. If there's a question that comes up that we don't know, let's get back to it. How about I come back in by the end of the day and we can go back to it. We can do our own respective reading and have an honest, good communication about it. I think that ends up making you so much stronger as an individual because you're not pretending to know something and potentially providing false information, whether to your patients, to your learners, to your peer colleagues. So I think that that's really critical. And I would end it with respect. I think that, again, treating each other with dignity as we're communicating to each other is really important when we're thinking about relationship-centered communication.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like when I think about relationship-centered communication, it's especially essential in mentorship. And as someone who has made mentorship a part of your identity as faculty, as a physician here, I'm really curious about your mentorship philosophy and what you believe mentorship can do for medical students and the role that it can play in medical student success and well-being. And then the second part to that question, how both students and faculty can build strong and mutually beneficial mentorship relationships.
Yes, I hear three questions. Philosophy of mentorship, how mentorship can foster well-being, and then how faculty and students can engage in mentorship. We'll first start with the philosophy of mentorship. I said this a little bit earlier. I honestly do believe it's a two-way relationship. I think that it's a symbiotic relationship where the mentor and the mentee are absolutely getting something out of it. And the philosophy with which it can really garner well-being and hopefully create a space of belonging. I think that includes mentorship that could be concordant as well as mentorship across differences. I think that there's multiple types, and I'm an avid believer in all of them. For me, the only way I actually was able to thrive and I feel get to a place where I felt like I've succeeded past my residency was through mentorship. Again, as I said earlier, or may have alluded to, I definitely had moments where I struggled in medical school. It was really hard for me to find someone who was a mentor. I didn't even think to look for a mentor. So I'll back up a little bit. End of my fourth year, so that last year of medical school, I had decided I was going to take a year off, and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Decided I wanted to do anesthesia, but came to it at the very end and decided to go to do a visiting away elective in New York City, where I was doing a clerkship in a critical care rotation. And it was the first time I saw an anesthesia resident who looked like me. Because I did medical school in Madison, Wisconsin, where I saw no one that looked like me in the field of anesthesia, not a single person. And I was having so much doubt in my ability to even go into anesthesia. Didn't see anyone that looked like me. There was a lot of, I would say, micro invalidations whenever I would express my interest in it. And again, their intent, they were not malicious, but there were micro invalidations that were still occurring that made me doubt myself, in addition to my own ongoing imposter syndrome, or shall I say imposterism. I really want to speak more to the system of imposterism, not the individual that has the imposter syndrome. They have the syndrome as a result of the societal circumstances typically. So I will say that seeing this individual, seeing a CA1, and I saw another level, a CA2 resident who was another Black female. One was from Haiti, another one was from Jamaica in New York City. And I cannot tell you the impact that had on me. It was profound. And I was, of course, doing what I needed to do during that sub-I. I was showing everyone that I am all about anesthesia. And those two individuals mentored me in a way that I didn't even know that I needed it. And they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. While I questioned and I was leading with a lot of self-doubt, they literally looked me in my eyes and said, "What do you mean, do you think you can do it? Of course you can do it. What are you talking about?" And they really actively mentored me. They kept tabs on me, reached out. They stayed in touch when I actually matched into that residency program. And at the time, they were both attending. So I started residency in the same program where they weren't there. They did private practice. So they weren't faculty members. They were just practicing anesthesiologists. But there were moments when in residency, I'm going to be vulnerable and say this, one of the faculty at that residency program made me cry in the OR my first day. They just yelled at me in front of everybody. And I just couldn't even make it to the bathroom to cry. The tears just started coming and everyone saw it. And the shame to allow her to see me cry like that. And for all the surgeons to look at me at the time that was happening, I just felt so weak. And the first person I reached out to was that resident and also the other resident, who both immediately said, "Oh my gosh, she was our co-resident. Don't take her too seriously. What happened?" And they just really cushioned the blow of, wow, that was way out of proportion in terms of the response of what that individual did. And it really helped me to continue to move on when you take a blow like that. Because there's one thing to cry in private, but once you do it publicly in an OR setting, it just feels like a punch in your gut. And if anything, it just made me feel like I needed to show up even more the next day. So I had these micro cheerleaders in my pocket. And I also had, I remember, will never forget him. He was a white male attending. He had come from Mount Sinai. And I remember the first month, again, I was that brand new first year anesthesia resident. And I, again, thought, gosh, I'm insignificant. I'm doing the best that I can. And he had me do a fiber optic intubation and was patient with me when we're doing it with the patient, which is a little bit more complex than a regular way that you would intubate a patient. And he high-fived me at the end. And something so little, seeing a middle-aged white male high-fiving me and showcasing how proud he was that I did it, there was an impact. There was an impact. And the barrier of feeling not good enough, I think some of those barriers broke down where I felt like I could come to him. I felt like I had, those other residents who were now practicing anesthesiologists that I could go to. I had like a pocket of people that I could go to, and all you need is a few. You don't need that many. But once you have one or two, I leaned on them through some of the really difficult times in residency. And I made it out on the other end. I matched my number one spot for pediatric anesthesia fellowship at the time when it was pretty competitive. And I went from a space of being very, very intimidated to feeling a lot more self-confident in my skills and feeling I was quite competent. But it took patience, it took time, it took mentorship in order to feel like I could get there. And I think that sometimes what that means is that institutions should also give space for individuals to blossom. And again, the mentorship, just as much as I think the concordant mentorship was important, I think the mentorship across differences was also equally as important for me. And then I think your last question, which is, well, how do you see that happening? Now I have both mentors and mentees. As a mentee, I think that I am a lot more intentional because I have an idea of what I expect a mentee for me should do, which is I want to know exactly what they're hoping to get out of it. And also a mentee that can understand that time is limited. And as a faculty member, we're pulled in so many different ways. So when we're in a space in front of you, if you already have your agenda ready to go and you have your questions ready to go, what you want to milk out of the situation ready to go, you're going to get so much out of it. And as I realized what factors were important from the mentees that I was interfacing with, I think it made me a better mentee because of their individuals that I have just said, you know what, I'm going to schedule a meeting with this individual. And when I've met, oftentimes, and I know they're very busy, I will launch in maybe like a minute or two of small talk, but I will not waste their time. I will go directly into this is why we're meeting. This is what I am hoping to understand a little bit more of. What is your advice? And milk that time in a way that I'm hoping that they're not thinking, okay, like we're just sitting here, or what is the goal? What is the direction? As the mentee, I drive that direction. And that's honestly, I think, really, really good advice for anyone who's looking to gain a lot of guidance from their mentor relationship. So I'll end it with, again, there's a lot of vulnerability. I think that mentorship is key to thriving in medicine. I think concordant mentorship, whether it's gender, race, or whatever intersectionality, can be just as profound as mentorship across differences. I think you need a family of mentors. It can't just be one, because one mentor can be strong in one dynamic, but not the other. So if you create a family of mentors, I think that can be really, really impactful in a way that you're able to navigate medicine as a career. And just being open-minded and give some space for bravery in these relationships.
Thank you so much for sharing. We talked a lot about vulnerability, and you modeled that so well and so perfectly for us. Thank you for sharing that experience that you had in residency. I think a lot of us hear about stories like this, but we seldom hear the impact that really has on people. And I'm glad that at the time you had folks in your corner that you could reach out to. And I hope that it inspires our listeners to start building that community for themselves and take the time to look for mentors. I feel like a mentor isn't just somebody that shows you how they got there, but there's somebody that walks alongside you and show you what you're capable of. And it really sounds like you found that mentorship. And I really manifest that for all of us that are training, because This is a hard path and this is a hard journey. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Michael, can you speak a little bit to what advice you might give to students who are unsure of how to approach staff members for support or help?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you are seeking out and what you want. And I think sometimes spending a little bit of time for yourself, reflecting about what am I looking for? What am I hoping to get? So, giving a concrete example, if you want to find a mentor because you want to do a research project, because you want a research project to help you make more competitive for a certain specialty, I think it's very important to just be upfront about that when you're reaching out and be honest with yourself about that. Be like, okay, I want a research project because I need this for XYZ career. And I think being very clear about that when you're reaching out, because you'll, as I talked about earlier, making sure you have a unified goal. I think projects and everything go way better when the person knows exactly what you're looking for. Or on the flip side, I've definitely had conversations with people because I literally felt lost. I felt overwhelmed, or I didn't know what was going on. And the point of me reaching out was because I wanted clarity, or I wanted an answer, or I wanted to just talk something through. That can be a little bit more anxiety inducing because there's a level of vulnerability there. So that's where choosing the right people to reach out to is important. And honestly, there's no system for that. It's a feeling thing. I'm a very intuitive, feeling-based person. So sometimes for lack of a better word, I just get a vibe of, hey, I feel like I can trust this person. And I've done that before where I've met some faculty for 30 seconds. And I was like, you know what? They seem like a great person to talk to about life. And I'll just send them an email and be like, hey, we talked about this. After you left, I started thinking about XYZ. It's been on my mind a lot recently. I'd love to talk this through with someone that has a little bit more experience than me. Could we meet up or set up a Zoom or something? And we just chat. And I would tell them right away, hey, I feel very lost in this area or this domain or whatever. And I just want to talk through where my head's at. And I've made a lot of really strong connections with people, both faculty and classmates that way.
That's a good point. One thing I also think about with reaching out to people, and I feel like this person is a very underutilized resource, Dennis in our medical student center. I find that, and I'm using Dennis as an example because sometimes I go in, just like you said, I don't have the clear goal in mind. And I'm like, Dennis, this is something that I am thinking. And half of the time, Dennis is like, okay, you can reach out to this person, to that person, to this person, to this person, to that person. And so sometimes coming to somebody with just an idea of what you need or what you think you need and being honest about that confusion, they can point you in the right direction to the people that can help you. And I think that bit that you mentioned about the vulnerability and being really honest with yourself about what are my needs right now? Who do I feel like I need to talk to? And even as you said, with getting a vibe from someone, I find that if I get a good vibe from a mentor, a good feeling from a mentor, and I'm just honest with them about, like, this is what I am thinking, they're so good about connecting me to what I need and even being able to help me parcel out those things for myself. Thinking about all of these relationships, can you speak a little bit to how students can have these deep connections and vulnerable connections with faculty and staff, but still work on maintaining professional boundaries with them as well?
My philosophy on boundaries, honestly, is pretty simple, that boundaries just depend on you and the other person, but they depend on you. And they're very dynamic. You can have a certain boundary about something, and that can change, and that's okay. And I think spending time thinking and reflecting about what boundaries are important for myself to set and being okay with those being fluid. Some examples, because it can be helpful to think about boundaries from a more practical standpoint, is it can be anything from, do I hand this person my phone number? Do I give them my phone number? Do I give them my email? Do I tell them, hey, text me anytime? Or do I say, hey, feel free to reach out via email? going back to the point of it depends on you, I don't set a lot of hard rules about, okay, XYZ people have to email me, XYZ people have to text me. I just kind of go based on what I feel comfortable with, being like, okay, what is my relationship connection with this person? Sometimes I feel comfortable to give my number. Sometimes I just tell them, here's my email. So it really just depends. And I just follow my own comfort level. Other people I know have firmer boundaries with that. I know other people who are like, anybody I work with, they're not getting my phone number unless we need to do XYZ together. And that's totally okay too. I'm a little bit more fluid with that, where it kind of depends on the relationship that I have with that person. And it depends on like what we're doing together. Sometimes just logistically, it's easier to give them my phone, or it's easier to just give them my email. Another thing is, what do you share with people? What do you talk about? This comes up a lot on clinical rotations, which you'll go to very soon. When you're in the hospital, you're working with a lot of different people who you might work with some residents or attendings for a week or a few days, or you might work with them for a few months. You may see them again. You may never see them again. And I think that question of boundaries of what do you share with them? How much do you share? What do you talk about? For me, again, that is just kind of a feel thing. I typically tend to share less about my own personal life, but that doesn't mean I haven't had times where I do share, like, oh, this is what I like to do, or this is where my family's from, or yada, yada, yada. And again, I think when it comes to boundaries, I just always evaluate, do I feel comfortable? Do I feel safe with this? And sometimes you maybe don't set a firm enough boundary. And then that is a reflection moment for yourself where you're moving forward. You're like, okay, in these situations, I really need to be clear about XYZ. So that dynamic piece is very important also.
Michael, I have a final question for you today. Can you speak to your reflections about community and connectiveness in our discussion today?
For me, community and thinking about the bonds that I have with people, that's something that has been important to me, not just since starting medical school, but for my whole life, where it's always been pretty important to me to foster and establish community. I think community is a word that is thrown around all the time. So I think I just like to share my definition of what is community, what does community mean to me? Because I think by sharing that and holding that definition in my heart, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm meeting people in med school, when I'm in clinic and I'm talking to patients or to families or to whoever. All that community really means to me is just human connection. That's really what it is. And it can be something as small as connecting with one other individual person. And connecting can be about anything. You're sharing a similar hobby, or you both share similar anxieties or insecurities or similar career goals. And community can become like a ripple effect where I establish a human connection with one person. That person maybe goes on to talk to their friend and is talking about something that we talked about. And then the three of us all talk about XYZ. That's a community. And that's how new initiatives form. That's how kind of groups and coalitions form. And you can take that however you will. But I think that something that has helped me get through med school so far is finding that connection with other people, whether it be a longitudinal connection where classmates and faculty that have known me since day one, or whether that's a very transient and temporary one. For example, throughout clerkships, you might have a very strong bond and community with your team of residents for the 1 week you're working together. And I still think pretty fondly of certain teams during some ridiculous weeks where there was just a lot of things going on. And I remember those people, even though I only saw them for 1 whole week and maybe we'll never see them again. They helped you through that week and you bonded through whatever was going on. And that's community also. So to me, it really just means connecting with those around you, whether that be for a few seconds or for many years.
I think you don't give yourself enough credit because in order to have that community that you speak of, you have to first lead with openness and a bit of vulnerability. To be able to form a connection with an individual and to have that ripple effect with others. The groundwork for that sort of community, transient or not, means that you have to be honest. It means you have to be genuine, and it means you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, and that's why I'm grateful for all of you for hosting this podcast and inviting people to come share their stories, their reflections, their thoughts, perspectives, because a lot of the times it just comes down to taking that first step,
Right.
being that person to be like, hey, you know what? I feel a little uncomfortable in this situation. I think sometimes in medicine, we do not sometimes, a lot of the
A lot
times,
of
we do
times.
not do this. We do not do this enough where we just admit, like,
Right.
hey, I felt so lost. I have no idea what I'm doing. This happens to me all the time on clinicals where on the outside, maybe you appear to be doing well, but on the inside, you just feel very flustered. I can share an example of a really good moment I had with the resident I was working with yesterday. And I had picked up a new patient and had presented to them. They were pretty complicated. They were new to me. I really didn't know what was going on, or I felt that way at least. And the resident came up to me afterwards. I was like, oh, Michael, you did so great, blah, 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 blah. It's really impressive given the time. And I just said, hey, like, thank you. But also internally, I felt so lost. I didn't know what was happening. And that led to a whole conversation about her sharing that she still feels the same way,
Right.
that sometimes she'll put in an order and be like, wait, was that right? I need to double check it. And it speaks to the point you said about how sometimes we just have to take that first step and be like, thank you for saying that. But also, this is kind of how I feel internally. Because a lot of the times, people are all feeling that, especially in medicine. We just don't talk about it.
I want to send a special thank you to Odie and Michael for sharing their thoughts today with us on how students can build successful relationship with peers, staff, faculty. I have one final question for each of them as we wind down. Starting with you, Michael. What do you think our listeners might do to foster belonging for others at UCSF?
I think we kind of just talked about it, but lead with yourself and lead with who you are, whatever that means to you. I don't want to talk too much about what that means because that would defeat the point of what I just said. For myself, I just kind of wear my heart on my sleeve, the good, the bad, the ugly, the whatever. And by doing that, I invite people into conversations about maybe things that we don't always regularly talk about because I say whatever first comes to my mind, like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling X, Y, Z. That's just who I am as a person. And I just lead with that without hesitation, without questioning myself. And I think that's what I would encourage to everyone else. Just lead with your authentic self and who you are, and you will find the right people and you will find the right connections that you have just floating around you, waiting for a conversation or a connection or moment to be shared.
Thank you, Michael. And then what about you, Odie? What might our listeners do to foster belonging for others at UCSF?
Great question. I'll just summarize some of the things that we've said earlier, which is active listening, engagement in inclusive activities, curiosity, vulnerability in order to understand people's stories a little bit more, and encouragement, collaboration. If I was to summarize everything that we've said, I think those key components that was already mentioned, those are going to be the key pieces that really can foster belonging. And understanding when we make mistakes, being patient, but then also allowing for growth and improvement and making sure that we see each other as human beings and celebrating each other's achievements. I think that those pieces are going to be all key in fostering a space of belonging.
Thank you so much. So in conclusion, today we have some key principles on relationship-centered communication as students build successful relationships with their peers, faculty, and staff. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode. Don't forget to tune in to other episodes in this series on medical student success. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Bridge. Please look for more episodes in our series. The Bridge is brought to you by the UCSF Academy of Medical Educators Innovations for Funding and Education program. Our hosts are Alvin Nguanga and Dr. Nakai Corral. Our production staff are Dr. Eric Hung and Valerie Jones. Our sound engineer is John Oliver. Our music is by Du Q, Wax Roof, Maban Noir, and Les Imprimes, courtesy of Big Crown Records.